You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
Now, that man who just said that's my foot there, sorry, this is David Thrussell. Now, let me just tell you a bit about David Thrussell, which I've got a feeling will be completely irrelevant because that's not what we're going to talk to him about. But let me tell you who David Thrussell is. He has an extensive catalogue of electronic music. Tell me if I get any of this wrong, will you?
You're doing well so far.
With a couple of his bands, I think, called Snog and Black Lung.
Correct.
He's played with the German electronic band Kraftwerk.
Yes.
He's DJ'd. I'm not sure formally or informally for Quentin Tarantino.
Correct.
Going well. Not usually this accurate with all these. He's remixed the electric legend band Aphex Twin. Remixed some of their electro music.
Correct.
He runs Omni Recording Corporation.
Correct.
He wrote the new introduction to, I'm just interested in this, but I've got a feeling we might get onto this if we exhaust the other subject he's in for.
Go ahead.
He wrote the new introduction to George Orwell's 1984. Mm-hmm. And he has a YouTube channel, the new series of the Forbidden Book Club.
Correct.
But you will think that I'm going to ask him about all those things. Well, I might get to it. But he tells us he is an authority. He mightn't be an authority. He's going to speak about the recent release of documents that gave us some insight into what happened to the assassination of John F. Kennedy and, in fact, Robert F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., not the Robert F. Kennedy who is the health minister or whatever he is for the Trump government. And I'm welcoming you, David, and I'm wondering what is your credibility to be an authority on the assassination of those two people?
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Look, I don't posit myself as an expert. I would rather say that I'm a student of those assassinations.
Why are you? You were 2 years old when he was assassinated, John F. Kennedy.
No, that's incorrect. That's via the internet.
Okay.
Don't trust the internet.
Okay. Well, it says you're 64.
No, it's incorrect. I wasn't born when these things happened.
Okay, you're not 64.
No.
I've done you a disservice.
The internet's wrong. It's often wrong. Be careful of the internet.
Yep.
No, but I wasn't alive when these things happened, but I have been interested in it for a long time, and I have, read pretty much every interesting book on the John F. Kennedy assassination that is around, that exists,
Just before you go, what has captured your imagination about that moment in time? I was 17 when it happened.
Okay, yep. Interesting.
And I heard it broadcast over the news at the school I was in. I heard news break into the programming. John F. Kennedy's been. Why have you become interested in it? What
it's an
bent of yours
question.
is that?
There's probably a couple of reasons, right? And I could talk about this in more length later on, but it is a great whodunit.
After this interview or now?
No, later in this interview.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is. I'm a fan of Sherlock Holmes and deduction and all these things. So it's a great whodunit story. Okay, but also it feels a bit more personal than that to me, and I'll give you a reason why.
Yes, do that.
So when I was a little kid, right? I guess I can't remember exactly, but I was 5 or 6, let's say, a young kid, right? I was sitting there with my dad, who sadly is no longer with us, but he was a great man, and something came on the TV, right, about Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone assassin of John F. Kennedy, right? And my dad, who I admired and still do, he just said, well, if you believe that, you'll believe anything.
Yep.
And that always stuck in my head. As a little kid, that was a sort of formative moment, I guess you could call it. Do you know what I mean? Because I went, here's the TV, which we're told knows everything.
Yep.
And here's my dad, who I respect, and he's saying bullshit. you know.
So why has your research, and that is a very popular opinion, and plenty of people have written about Lee Harvey Oswald and who he was and who he was a patsy for. I know you'll get into that, but how did you go about deciding that that wasn't right, and from all the other investigations, and the Warren report came out, it was like you couldn't jump over the Warren report, and most of it,
889 pages
and
long.
most of it they reckon is just gobbledygook and just to throw people off. And then Trump said he'll release the final pages of it, and nothing much was gained by doing that. Was there, or was there? Was there a bit more?
Look, little breadcrumbs here and there. You know, we can talk about that later on if you wish to. You know,
I want you to talk about it now, mate. Just tell me. So, are you're not a conspiracy theorist?
Well, I wanted to...
Well, sort of, because everyone is really, if they're having an opinion about it, aren't they?
Well, that's a good point. It's a good point. You know, I wanted to point out a couple of things about this term, actually, conspiracy theorist, right? In fact, I printed out for your perusal this copy of the original CIA memo from 1967, where it suggests to their assets in the media and friendly politicians, I'm quoting the document itself, that they disparage anybody who asks questions about the Warren Commission, that they're to be called conspiracy theorists. Okay, and obviously the CIA didn't invent the words conspiracy and theorist, right? I'm not proposing that they did, but this is kind of the seminal document where that term comes from to disparage people who ask any questions, right? You know, people who've got doubts or questions, as any reasonable person would. If you've seen the President of the United States slaughtered in front of the world in a very public execution, you might want to have some questions about that. You might. Right? So if you do, here's the CIA telling their assets in the media and their friendly politicians to say that conspiracy theorists are just motivated by money and they're all nuts.
So it's okay to have an opinion as long as your opinion agrees with the people who write the official documents, and if you don't agree with that, you are automatically a conspiracy theorist. Still going on today.
It's still going on today, which is very interesting in itself. And I just wanted to mention that I feel like, this is my point of view, every time you use that term to disparage somebody, you're basically doing the CIA's work for them, okay? Here's the document, 1967, they're telling you what to do. I also wanted to point out about this term, conspiracy theorist, that actually I'm old enough now, right, to remember what's called conspiracy theory now used to be called politics. And it used to be called journalism. And it used to have the assumption that powerful people and powerful groups had interests and would join together to pursue those interests. That used to be called politics. So that's what's now called conspiracy theory, if you point it out. And I also wanted to add more depth to that by saying, actually, in our culture, there's an acknowledgement, right, that powerful people join together to get what they want. Machiavelli.
Vested interests.
It's in Machiavelli's The Prince, you know,
propaganda.
How you organise, you know, how you manipulate the public. It's in Machiavelli. It's in Shakespeare. It's in Hamlet, you know. There are conspiracies weaved for people to gain power. You know, it's in the very foundations of our history.
I might digress, but is that why you wrote the new introduction to George Orwell's 1984?
Well, I think it's a very important
because
book.
He was on about
totalitarianism.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
Yeah, and it's a very misunderstood book, 1984, I think.
Is it?
Yeah, well, yes, because it has and nobody really ever wants to talk about this, and I think there are obvious reasons why they don't, but it's a very autobiographical book, 1984. Orwell worked at the BBC, right? No one ever wants to talk about this, right? So he witnessed many things at the BBC that went on to inspire 1984. But I write about that in the introduction to the book in detail.
So, for the unwashed, for the rank and file who listen to this, me included, you are saying that there's no way Lee Harvey Oswald was up in the Depository? Is that no, hang
The
on.
Texas
Is
Book
that something you
Depository.
stick up your bottom?
Yeah, close.
A
but-
suppository. There's no way that Lee Harvey Oswald was in a repository on the grassy knoll or whatever up in and as Kennedy and his missus and the other people who were shot came round, he fired off 2 shots, and one a miraculous bullet detoured into someone else.
Supposedly
Yes.
by the Warren Commission. Yeah.
And-
No, I don't believe a word of it, and I don't think there's much point expending a lot of energy on thinking that Lee Harvey Oswald took the shots, and I can tell you why. Okay.
Yes.
And it's actually in the Warren Commission. It's in there, buried in their supplemental evidence, their 26 volumes of supplemental evidence, and that's because on the afternoon that Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, right, Friday the 22nd of November 1963, Oswald is arrested, right, and the police, as is standard when people are about to be charged with some sort of gun crime, right, he's issued what is called a paraffin test, right?
Yes.
It's a very standard thing. A paraffin test, they put it on your hands, your face, your cheek,
See if
all
you've
this
got
sort of stuff.
explosives on you.
Exactly.
Something.
That's right. Gunpowder leaves and traces of nitrates, right? So they give Lee Oswald a paraffin test, right? And he tests negative, right? He has not fired a gun that day, okay? But there's more, right? So he tests negative, right? So it's clearly scientifically established that Lee Oswald has not fired a gun that day, okay? However, 2 days later, Jack Ruby shoots him dead,
Yes.
right, in front of the world again, right? And the next day, when Lee Oswald's corpse is at the morgue, they give him another paraffin test, right? Because they didn't get the right result the first time they did it,
see,
okay?
yeah.
So the second time they give him a paraffin test, he tests positive. His corpse somehow,
Surprise,
the living
surprise.
Lee Oswald didn't fire a gun, but the corpse somehow did fire a gun and tested positive for the paraffin test.
So, straying from the official version, this is where the conspiracy theorists and theory comes in.
I would
Who
say it's where
was
reality comes in, actually.
Yes,
Sam.
no,
I would say it's where reality absolutely intrudes. It's obvious. He had a paraffin test. He didn't fire a gun. Okay? So the case, this is why you can't have a trial. You can't have a trial, right? Because the case falls apart instantly. It's over. It's over.
I was only saying this is where the conspiracy theory comes in because it doesn't go along with the version that you've just brought in with you.
Sure.
And they said the Israeli what is their Cossack, not the what are they called, the Israeli Secret Service called
Mossad.
They said what?
Mossad.
The Mossad were responsible. They've said a whole lot of different people were responsible. The
Yes.
CIA,
Yes.
the Cuban president.
Cubans, the Russians,
The
the
Russians.
mob, the mafia.
And
take
how
your
have
pick.
you managed to delve through all the suspected players in this and arrive at what is your conclusion? Not that
Okay.
we want your conclusion now, but how have you arrived at some of your findings?
It's a good question.
Thank you.
So, look, the first way I would answer that is I think the Kennedy assassination is still incredibly important. Okay, there are people who tell you that's not relevant anymore. Okay, but I think there's obvious evidence that it is relevant, and I think one of the most obvious pieces of evidence is that it's still as a cover-up. There are files,
Yes.
even so. President Trump has issued this executive order, right? Executive Order 14176, declaring that all federal government files in the US that they're anyway connected to the Kennedy assassination should be released to the public immediately.
And have they been?
No, they have not. They have not. Apparently there are at least dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of files that people know about. They know they exist, and they haven't been released to the public, including Lee Harvey Oswald's tax records,
Yep.
Jack Ruby's tax records, their tax returns. These documents are still classified 60 years after their deaths.
I'm desperately trying to think of the man who was not in Trump's cabinet anymore, but he was his right-hand man. He was a big man. He's now lost weight. And he advised Trump in his first term. He said Trump was going to do that in his first term as president. He said, please don't release the files. what's his name?
Pompeo.
Thank you, Dickie.
Yeah, that's right.
Dickie's over here, incidentally. Dickie from Muff. Pompeo said, "Don't whatever you do." Why would Pompeo say that?
Well, you've clearly got something
if
to
he's-
hide on the most obvious level. But also, I want to go a little bit deeper than that. And I want to say that the idea that a government and a bureaucracy are going to keep for 60 years any kind of files or anything in writing that's going to embarrass them, I think is kind of hopelessly naive. You know, the idea that really there's going to be any kind of smoking gun hidden in those files is a bit naive, to be honest. You know, if there was any documentary evidence that was going to severely embarrass anyone powerful, it would have disappeared a long, long time ago.
So is it futile keeping on investigating this?
No.
So who are you? Who have you narrowed it down to that might be responsible for this, and why?
Well, I wanted, if I may,
Soviets?
I wanted to mention a really
Cubans?
interesting book. I do a show called the Forbidden Book Club.
Yes, good.
Here's a book. It's very hard to find these days in a hard copy form.
Yep.
It's called False Mystery, right?
Yep.
It was written by a Philadelphia lawyer called Vincent Salandria, who's sadly no longer with us. This is an amazing book. You can find it on the internet as a PDF, and I really recommend that people read it. What Salandria says in this book is, and he was one of the first people to call out the Warren Commission, right, as false, right? He was right.
And
was
who
there at
is
the
Mr.
beginning.
Salandria? What's his credibility?
Well, he was a lawyer in
Yep.
Philadelphia,
Good.
but he was obviously, beyond that, he was also a very smart man, right?
Right.
His book's called False Mystery, right? So that gives you a hint. He says that we should, and he argues very passionately and very intelligently in his book, that we should stop looking at all the details of how it was done, okay? This is a red herring, okay? We need to start talking about why it was done, okay? Salandria argues very convincingly that it's obvious that Lee Oswald was not involved. The evidence is in the Warren Commission. At all. Well, no, he didn't fire a gun. He didn't fire a gun.
No.
Okay? That's obvious.
Why was he up? Was he up in the repository?
He was never in the 6th floor. There's no evidence he was in the 6th floor.
He wasn't there at all.
No, he was downstairs in the lunchroom drinking a Coke. Okay, that's when the first policeman came in a minute after the assassination.
Why was he there?
He was
drinking
working
a
there.
Coke. Oh, he worked at the repository.
The book depository.
What am I calling it?
All sorts of things.
Suppository.
All sorts of things.
Depository.
He was a patsy, right?
It's not a repository, it's a depository.
Depository.
Yes,
It's where they
pardon
deposit.
me. I told you I was
It
only
was the Texas
partially
school book
educated.
depository.
Yeah, depository. Yes,
Yeah, it's where they kept all the school books.
Yes,
in
I
Texas,
know that.
right?
I've got the wrong.
It's a warehouse.
Yeah.
So Lee Oswald is working at this warehouse, right? That overlooks the assassination route.
Yep.
You know, but what Salandria argues very convincingly is that we need to discard. We've looked at those details enough. Okay, we need to look at the bigger picture. You know, for example, you know, here's one aspect of the bigger picture, and it's very straightforward politics. I would argue, if you look back, you know, to Julius Caesar and Brutus and these sort of things. Why, if you're a political enemy of John F. Kennedy, right, and you want him gone, okay, this is politics. This happens all the time in our society.
Yes.
Okay, it's not unusual, is it? You know, he has political enemies.
Yes, ask Donald Trump about that.
Sure, you know, so if Kennedy had political enemies and they wanted him gone, okay, there's a lot of ways they could get rid of him without executing him in front of the world, okay? That's a very dangerous thing to do.
Yep.
You know, you can be exposed doing that. You can leave all sorts of untied ends. That can really become undone very quickly for you, okay? So why execute apparently the most powerful man in the world in front of the world, okay?
So David Thrussell, I've sort of I've been pretty interested in this, only because I lived through it, but you've asked probably the most obvious question that I've never heard anyone ask.
Exactly.
Is
Why?
Why? But if Lee Harvey Oswald was sitting down drinking a Coke in the bottom floor, did they drag someone out of the 6th floor, or was that made up as well?
No, they didn't drag anyone out of the 6th floor.
But they did say that, didn't they? They said someone shot. They said he shot the president from the 6th floor.
They
Did they not?
accuse him of that, okay.
They accused him of that.
They accused him of that.
How
There was
could
never
they-
a trial because he was killed by Jack Ruby before there could be, you know.
Yeah, we'll get on to why Jack Ruby might have killed him and who
Sure.
was backing him and who was pulling his
We
strings.
can do that,
Yeah,
yes.
but so I always thought there was someone up in the, whether it was Oswald or not, there was someone up in the depository, 6th floor, that shot the president. You're saying that never happened at all.
It's likely, and I don't want to get buried in the weeds, but it was likely that there was somebody shooting from the 6th floor of the book depository.
Oh, I see, yeah.
But it's likely, most likely, in fact, that there were other shooters. There was probably at least 3 teams of shooters, okay, possibly 4 that people can know about, you know. If you look at, for example...
fired firearms, that fired guns?
Yeah.
And so they only found 2 bullets, didn't they?
No, they found more bullets than that.
Did they?
Yeah. There would have been, there would have been at least 5 or 6 shots fired, at least. And there could be more than that because they could coincide with each other. It's hard to tell.
Oswald, there's no way he could reload the gun and fire it in that short space of time.
He failed the paraffin test. He didn't fire a gun that day, okay? So let's stop talking about Oswald like he fired a gun. It didn't happen, okay? Somebody else was firing the guns, okay? You know, and if you look at the Zapruder film, I don't know if you've looked at the Zapruder film. You know, the film shot by Abraham Zapruder of the assassination, okay? It's the famous film where... And it's very unfortunate. It's a very horrible thing to watch. But where you see basically Kennedy's head ripped off, okay? That's a film shot by a fellow called Abraham Zapruder, right?
And he was a journalist, was he? Or was he a film? He was
No,
just filming
he was in the rag trade. He was a textile merchant and clothing merchant who worked in the building opposite, which was the Dallas Textiles
And he
building.
just happened to be filming the parade.
That's
Did he
his
not?
story, yes. He says that he happened to have been there filming. He had a very good view of things as they happened. It's interesting, though, if you look at the Zapruder film very closely, it's been clearly altered from day one, okay? You'll notice, and no one ever notices this, but I've noticed this. If you look at the Zapruder film, the Daltex building, which is where Abraham Zapruder had his office and warehouse, has been painted out of the film.
He was a Jewish man?
I believe he was, yes.
Hence could be the Mossad, could be the Cubans, could be the Russians, could be anyone.
Well, there's a cast of potentials, isn't there? Which is the idea. You know, one of the things that Salandria argues is that an event of this scale, okay, so this is a major operation. This is not some lonely loser like we're told Lee Oswald was, and he wasn't. He had a security clearance and he worked on radar systems in Japan at the height of the Cold War. This is not a loser, loner guy, okay? This is actually a spy. He was a spy, you know. But we're told that he's a lonely loser, you know. But somebody in Lee Oswald's position can't make the Secret Service stand down, which they did on the day. They were derelict in their duties, okay? Lee Oswald can't generate a cover-up that goes for over 60 years, okay, because he's dead. Somebody else, some other force, must have been orchestrating this event. It's very obvious.
So this has all the similarities of a man we interviewed a couple of weeks ago called Paul Moda, who said that the Port Arthur shooting wasn't as it appeared, and I got the shit kicked out of me for speaking to a man who had a conspiracy theory about what that was about, and I think I asked him the same question. Well, who was behind this? And see,
this is the problem, Sam. I think this is the problem. I think as a society, we face an existential crisis right now.
Yep. Okay,
and I would suggest that crisis is political correctness. Okay,
Yep.
I think if we don't destroy political correctness, it will destroy us and our society, okay?
I couldn't agree with you more.
So political correctness dictates that you can't ask uncomfortable questions, okay? And I'm arguing the complete opposite.
But these questions are uncomfortable because you're exposing the lies of people who want a different narrative to be written into history.
Absolutely, 100%.
And why do they? Why? Because they're complicit in the act? Is it?
It seems
The
self-evident, doesn't it?
United States government, the CIA being part of it in conjunction with bad actors, or it's
Well,
just.
I would suggest that there are some really obvious key takeaways from the Kennedy assassination, okay? And these are things that make the Kennedy assassination still important and relevant today, okay? I would suggest that the Kennedy assassination shows you how power actually works in politics.
Just 1 second,
okay?
are we still on air? Are we? All right, that's okay, because the thing's gone off behind you. I'd hate to think we're doing this.
Okay.
Okay, no worry.
Yep,
You're
sure.
in the black now. You're black on black.
Okay, great.
Yep, go on.
So I would suggest that the Kennedy assassination makes it plain to us how politics and power actually work, okay? And this is really important, okay? So in politics, in the real world, right, not in the fantasy in the mainstream media and not in the fantasy of political correctness, in real politics, the way it works, if powerful people don't like somebody, they get rid of them, okay? This is important, okay? This is how politics really works, okay?
Yes.
I would argue that all our democracy stuff, our elections and all this sort of stuff is clearly fake, okay? Because a fellow like John F. Kennedy, right, who had enemies, he's the elected president, the head of the free world, quote unquote, but somebody powerful doesn't like him, they blow his head off in public, okay? That tells you how power actually works, okay? And the fact that they can and did blow his head off in front of the world in the most gruesome way possible, okay? They didn't cook up a sex scandal or a media smear, okay? They didn't get him out at the next election or some other way that you can get rid of people that you don't like in politics, and it happens all the time. They blew his head off in public, and I think there are clear reasons why they did this, okay? I think one of the reasons why they did this is to scare the hell out of people, okay?
So, David, this is absolute history repeating itself with a bespectacled boy with a part down the middle of his hair trying to assassinate Trump. This has happened 6 months ago, and this is exactly the scenario you're painting with. Well, just happens to be Trump, but
there
someone
are similarities, yes.
Similarities,
yes. I doubt that the fellow, what was his name, Matthew Crooks?
Yeah,
I think?
Crooks, yep.
Crooks, right? I call him Lee Harvey Crooks.
Yep.
Okay, he's just, in my view, another patsy.
Well,
as
so
far as I can
it's
say.
exactly the scenario
It's
I'm
very
saying.
similar, yeah.
And then the other man who was parked by his golf club is...
Who knows? I mean...
who was a Ukraine...
You've got to have the
asset.
right. You've got to actually seize the right, right? This is why I'm so opposed to political correctness, okay? Because you should have and you should take the right to ask questions, okay? Because if you don't ask questions, these lies, these myths will stand, okay? I doubt, it's just my personal view, I very much doubt that Lee Harvey Crooks fired a weapon that day as well, okay? I see no evidence that
The
he
bloke
did.
who shot Trump.
Who supposedly shot at him. I don't see any evidence that he shot a weapon that day.
Don't you?
No. I haven't seen any footage. I haven't seen a photo of him shooting. I've seen nothing actually that convinces me that he fired a weapon that day. Okay, maybe he did.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen any evidence that he has. They're two different things. Okay.
So the book False Mystery by Mr.
Vincent Salandria.
Have you got most of your information and critique of what's about the Warren Report and the whole
No, not necessarily.
mystery from the book?
No, I was mostly inspired by his philosophy and his point of view, which I thought was very solid, where he said, as I mentioned earlier, he says, don't get lost in the weeds, okay? Look at the big picture. Start asking why do these things happen, okay? Not how, because anything like this, I would argue, anything like the Kennedy assassination or 9/11 or any of these things, these are intelligence operations, okay? These are operations, I would argue, that are designed by large organisations or powerful groups of people, and they design them specifically so that you can get lost in the details. I argue they're a bit like an onion, okay? You can keep peeling layers off the onion until you're blue in the face. Okay?
So, these large organisations and groups of powerful people are whom or who?
So I think...
Not sure if there's an M on the end of whom or who. Who?
So I think there are some logical deductions that you can make, okay, from the evidence that's right in front of your eyes.
Good.
Okay? The first one is that whomever has done this, in the case of Kennedy, right, is extremely powerful, okay? I tried to make this point. If you can blow the president's head almost clean off in public, in front of the world, and then you can get somebody to kill the alleged assassin 2 days later, you're extremely powerful.
And then kill the assassin secondly, Mr. Ruby.
Yep.
Get Mr. Ruby to kill the assassin.
Yep. That whole scenario, what that says is that you're extremely powerful, okay? What the cover-up says to me, the Warren Commission, the mainstream media playing along with an obvious... I mean, the official version of the Kennedy assassination is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Is it?
Yep, you shouldn't entertain it. It's stupid, okay? And the fact that to get a gig, to get a job in the mainstream media today, or the mainstream of politics today, you still have to go along with the fantasy of the official version of the Kennedy assassination, tells you that it's very powerful. Okay?
So,
it's very powerful, and it's politically powerful, and it's culturally very powerful.
Just going to come back to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, but
please. No,
you don't rest there. You think maybe Sirhan, who shot and killed Robert Kennedy, is this inextricably linked, or is they separate things, or does the slaughter and the mayhem go on by these powerful people who have powerful organisations behind them for the same reason or different reasons?
Well,
is that a religious thing?
Well, to not get lost into the weeds, okay?
Yeah.
I think it seems to me self-evident, right? If you've got the president, John F. Kennedy, right, gets his head blown off, very ugly, very horrible event in public, very powerful event in public. A few years later, not quite 4.5 years later, his brother, who's about to run for president and would probably win, right, he also is shot publicly and very obviously and dies, okay?
Yep.
To not join these events together seems a bit dumb to me, okay? It seems like the sort of dumbness that can only exist in the mainstream media.
They investigated who Sirhan, is it Sirhan?
Sirhan,
Have
yes.
they investigated who, did he shoot Robert F. Kennedy, and have they investigated who his links were and who's associated with?
I'm going to defer that opinion to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.,
yes,
RFK's son,
yes,
who thinks very clearly, and he's argued in public, he's also argued at Sirhan's parole hearing a few years ago, that Sirhan did not kill his father. So the son of RFK is on the public record saying Sirhan did not kill my father.
How did Robert F. Kennedy die? Did Sirhan,
wounds.
What was it visible? Could you see him shoot? Could you see him shoot Robert F. Kennedy, or did the bullet come from out of nowhere?
So the evidence, as it appears, right? If you look at the evidence as a whole, it appears that Sirhan, and there are rumours that he was hypnotised or mind controlled and these kind of things. Okay, but the evidence and all the witnesses, and there was a lot of witnesses. It was in a crowded room, okay? It was in a hotel kitchen at the Ambassador Hotel, okay? A lot of witnesses, right? All the witnesses say that Sirhan is 5 or 6 feet in front of Robert Kennedy, right? Shooting a gun, okay? But the autopsy of Robert Kennedy...
Don't tell me the bullet was in the back of the head.
The bullet was in the back of the head.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah. There were powder burns behind his right ear that were done at point-blank range. So the autopsy, the coroner, the Los Angeles official coroner, said that he died from gunshot wounds that were contact wounds. The gun was on the back of his head near his ear. That's what killed him.
I'm not making light of this, David.
No, it's terrible.
I'm not making light of this next thing, but would it be too big a stretch to say that both were involved with Marilyn Monroe, and it was just getting a bit diplomatically dicey for people to
I don't
have
think-
bedroom talk while they were exercising their option.
Look, Marilyn was a a fine actress and a striking looking woman, but I don't think she had the power.
No, but they thought someone might have thought they were in the moment of ecstasy, leaking out national secrets to this blonde woman. That's just a stretch too far. That's a road too far.
I don't think it's directly relevant, but your opinion is your opinion, of
no,
course.
it's not my opinion. I was just.
No, but so Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went to Sirhan Sirhan's parole hearing and said, Sirhan Sirhan did not kill my father, someone else did. And there's a big chunk of evidence. I've just given you the basics there. There's too many, they found 8 or 9 bullets in there, right? And there's evidence, I think, I'm working from memory here, but I think acoustically, because there were journalists present, people were recording, okay? So there is a recording of Robert Kennedy's assassination, an audio recording, okay? And audio experts have said they think there might be as many as 12 bullets being fired.
That's when the bloke yelled out, "Rafer, get the gun, didn't he? Was that the same assassination? When they...
Yeah, they did hold Sirhan Sirhan
Rafer
down.
was his,
and he was still firing.
Yeah,
he was still firing. It was extremely strong, Sirhan Sirhan. So there's too many bullets. Essentially, there's too many bullets for one gun. You can't fit 12 bullets in a pistol, okay? So you're going to fit either 6 or 8. I think it's 8, So there's too many bullets. And they all knew this. They all, the police knew this. And they covered it up.
So have you been asked, do people over in America know that you're sort of an expert, you're an investigator?
No, I'm not an expert.
Well, no,
I
don't mean you're an expert, but you have a pretty reasonable explanation of why it's nonsense. Have you ever been asked to be interviewed over in America about why you're doing this from Australia? What interest do you have in this?
I have given hundreds of interviews on these various topics. I do also write for an Australian magazine, sometimes called New Dawn magazine. I have just written a big Kennedy piece, which will be in the next issue of New Dawn in about a month's time.
That's one of the things I missed here in your CV,
right.
New Dawn.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So I have written a big piece on the Kennedy assassination. It will be in New Dawn magazine in roughly a month.
Where do we get New Dawn? At the newsagent?
At the newsagent or a supermarket, even some supermarkets.
I see.
Yes.
But
I think it's important, Sam. Yeah. I do think it's important actually that we have honest conversations about these events, okay? Because like I said, they show us how politics works, okay? And they show us how power works, right? So when you blow John F. Kennedy's head off in public, okay, and not only do you frighten the public, like, it's a way of traumatizing the public, because so many people have said to me, so many average, people have said to me, well, if they can blow John F. Kennedy's head off, what do you think they can do to me? Okay, and it's a great way. I would argue that part of the design of these things is it's a great way of demoralising and cowering the public. Okay, making them frightened of power. Okay, but also think about it. Right, since John Kennedy's assassination, right, very public, very obvious assassination. Everyone's seen the Zapruder film now. Every US president since 1963 knows exactly what happened to John Kennedy. Okay. They know this. I know Richard Nixon knows well what happened to John F. Kennedy. He spoke about it a number of times, okay?
He knows the real reason, the late Dickie Nixon.
He spoke about, these matters.
Is this why Pompeo, who is still with us, advised Trump not to go and investigate it or release the...
Well, they know to leave it alone. They know to leave it alone. So if you read, for example, the Roger Stone book about the Kennedy assassination, right? It's quite a good book. He talks, because Roger Stone worked with Richard Nixon, right, and knew him quite well.
And Trump.
Right? Yeah, and Trump. Yeah. So Roger Stone talks about Richard Nixon.
Went to jail because...
of the whole stuff,
too close to maybe a conspiracy theory about Obama or Hillary Clinton or something.
I mean, power is what it is, isn't it? Power and politics are dirty games. They're ugly, dirty games, Yeah, but Roger Stone said in his JFK book, he said that he was talking to Richard Nixon about the Kennedy assassination, and Nixon said, well, I was desperate to be president. Mrs. Nixon. I wanted to be president, but I wasn't prepared to kill for it like Lyndon Johnson was. This is a quote, apparently, from Richard Nixon.
So I was just going to say he wasn't in line to be the president because the vice president was Lyndon Johnson.
Correct.
So are you implicating Lyndon Johnson as part of the
so my opinion,
collaborative cabal against
the conspirators, perhaps?
Yes, whatever.
So it's my opinion that Lyndon Johnson would have had to have known beforehand what was happening. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. It's in the Warren Commission report. It's in the 26 volumes of supplemental evidence. There was more than one witness, right, prior to the assassination who saw, and these are presidential aides, these are Secret Service agents, okay, who saw Lyndon Johnson duck before the first shot.
Oh, no.
Okay? He's a couple of cars back, right?
He's there.
Yeah, he's there, right? He's in the, I've been to Dealey Plaza in Dallas. I know the layout of the place, right? It's not very far. He's 2 or 3 cars back, okay? So there's more than one witness anyway. There's, at least 2 witnesses, possibly more, I think, who describe in the Warren Commission report, in the supplemental evidence, that they saw Lyndon Johnson go down before the first shot.
Was that apparent from the clothing manufacturer who happened to have a camera and saw the skull being completely shattered?
No, he's focused on Kennedy.
Is he?
At those moments, you don't see the other cars.
Why was he focused on Kennedy if he didn't know something was going to happen?
Well, this the
He's
president.
just a tourist.
Yes, the president. Sure.
Yeah.
But so I do believe it's my opinion that Lyndon Johnson had foreknowledge at least. But come on, think about it.
Yeah, no, I am thinking about it.
People kill for power. I mean, people do things for power. This is politics. This is reality. This is how it works.
Would Lyndon Johnson have the political clout and nous to organise?
No, not on his own. Not on his own. There's no way. I don't think, in my opinion.
But someone would probably have come to Lyndon and said, "Do you want to be the president? Because stand by, you might be shortly." He wouldn't have said, I'd like to be the president. Can you round up a few people and take out Jack for me, would you?
I think the last version is unlikely. But I think it's fairly obvious. If you have someone ducking before there are any shots fired,
absolutely.
I think it's fairly obvious that they know what's about to happen. Okay? Now, it's my view.
Why would he be... you investigated why Johnson would be preferable to Kennedy because...
There's a bunch of reasons.
Is there?
There's a bunch of reasons, I mean, Lyndon Johnson
Cuba?
was... Look, there's a
Small
whole lot
players?
of reasons. Look, to give you an overview, my personal view is that the conspiracy to kill Kennedy was a coalition of various people in various positions. In the
United States government?
Yes, some of them.
In America, in North America?
Yes, some of them.
Yep.
Yes, definitely.
Some of them.
Some of them, yeah.
Deep state.
That's what you might call it today. People in powerful positions had a shared interest in getting rid of Kennedy. He had a lot of enemies, okay? Lyndon Johnson has a lot to gain by becoming president. That seems fairly self-evident, and you have a lot of powerful people who have a lot to gain by getting rid of Kennedy.
So what vested interest would the deep state or whoever wanted Kennedy out of business, dead, what vested interest would they have? Would they change the direction the country is headed in, or would they be doing different...
You can break it basically into domestic policy and foreign policy.
Yes.
Okay? This is how politics works.
There's no other.
Yep. So domestic policy... Well, basically it's an adjunct to foreign policy, isn't it? Kennedy was opposed to getting involved in the Vietnam War, okay? He was mortally opposed to this,
Yep.
There are also other whispers about other foreign policy things as well, There is the Middle East question, which is now... That used to be the question that you weren't able to talk about at all, but now people on the internet are talking about it a lot, is the foreign policy aspect in the Middle East as well. So you have Vietnam... You have the Middle East. You also have Kennedy...
The war machine. The people in charge of making the munitions and the...
Yes, I think that's pretty secondary myself,
Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a red herring. That's just my opinion. You also have the domestic issue that Kennedy had made it pretty clear that he wanted to get rid of the CIA. So
see.
he
Yep.
had said to a journalist friend of his that he wanted to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind, okay, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He was incredibly angry at the CIA, okay?
Yep.
So he had made it known privately to people around him that he wanted to destroy the CIA, okay? So you've got in there foreign policy, domestic policy, you've got a nexus of a whole lot of people who have power who want to get rid of him.
So although they're politically opposed diametrically, Trump is doing that. He wants to reorganise the FBI. He thinks they're corrupt, doesn't he? He thinks they...
Well, he's said that, yes.
He said that because he would have pretty good evidence that they tried to get him out of business by the warfare and the lawfare of him, all the things he did. I know we don't want to get into whether we like Trump or not, but
realistically, I do have to say realistically, if you're going to attempt a project like that, something like the Kennedy assassination is screaming at you from 60 years ago that you better be careful.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, you better watch your step, okay? Now, as the US Congressman Chuck Schumer said famously, he said, if you mess with the intelligence
there's
agencies...
7 different ways we'll come at you.
6 ways from Sunday.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
6 ways from Sunday, they will get you, okay? So this, I would argue, this is why the Kennedy assassination is so important, okay? Because what Chuck Schumer says is a ripple from the Kennedy assassination, okay? It's a ripple in time because Chuck Schumer, who I'm personally not a fan of at all, but he knows that if you mess with these powerful people, it's called politics. They'll blow your head off, or they'll cook up some scandal against you, or they'll remove you in some fashion, okay? Because they're powerful, okay? They've got actual power, real power that they can operate on, and if you piss them off, they'll use it against you, okay? And this happens everywhere in power. I mean, you know, this is why I think, it's just my personal view, this is why one of the reasons that makes it obvious that our so-called democracies are incredibly fake, okay? Because, we all do this stupid election thing and vote for Tweedledee or Tweedledum at the stupid election thing. You know, the media largely dictates who will win this thing, supposedly, you know. But when it matters, somebody will use brute force. Somebody with power will use brute force to get what they want. And it's always been that way, you know? Julius Caesar and Brutus tells us this, you know, that...
I'll take your word for that.
Well, you know, a bunch of people, Caesar's in the way, Julius Caesar's in the way, they don't like him, you know. As we were saying earlier, like the mainstream media version today of Julius Caesar's assassination would be that to say... That to cast any doubts or to ask any questions would be a conspiracy theory, wouldn't it? It would be that Brutus happened to be carrying a knife because he was going to a picnic and fell over and happened to graze Julius Caesar along with 10 or 20 other senators who also happened to be going to the same picnic, fell over, grazed them with the knife that they happened to be carrying. That's the version that the ABC would give you today, okay, of that event. So
before I get your final verdict on just who has organised this, in your opinion, is there anyone else of, not authority, of credible standing that you speak to about this, either here or overseas or on Skype or on email, or is there an association where you trade information about this, or is this, how have you come to compile all this? David Thrussell, who has got nothing to do with much of this except you're an electronic catalogue man and you've got bands and you've got the bloody book club.
Well, I'm a musician, Sam, you know, so
which makes it all the more extraordinary that you're doing this.
You should be able to relate. We're in showbiz. We're in showbiz, right? You were a footy player and you were in showbiz and whatever. Showbiz is a funny world.
But I would have no idea how to go about researching the death of...
I can give you a hand if you ask. I can help you out.
No, why would I? That's right.
Well, look, I've got some other books here that I could suggest to you. This is a popular book which is very interesting about the Kennedy assassination. It's called JFK and the Unspeakable. Oh, yeah. If you want to go down the rabbit holes, it's pretty good, okay? It's got a lot of rabbit holes.
I thought you were going to drag out Mein Kampf then.
No, I'll leave that to Richard.
So David,
Yes.
Why are these books, it says the Forbidden Book Club,
Yes.
are these not readily available or been banned for some reason, or is that just a title, just a provocative title?
No, we go into difficult, hard to obtain books, some of which have been classified. Actually, we've done 2 shows on the Forbidden Book Club about books that have actually been classified by the CIA at one stage.
I see.
This book, I'd love to do this book. Actually, I haven't got around to it yet, but this book is extremely hard to get. You're probably going to pay $1,000 to get a copy of this book these days. Yeah, it's very hard to get. But you can find the PDF.
Where did you get it?
I bought it years ago because I'm interested in these things. I bought it for $50.
And now it's been sort of vaguely taken off the market, has it? Or?
Well, perhaps it's definitely very hard to get, and it's very expensive.
Well, who's taken it off the market?
Look, I'm not sure. I don't have that information. All I know is it's very hard to get. But I do recommend it. You can find a PDF on the internet.
So if you went to your bookseller and you said, now, Mr. Penguin, could you possibly source False Mystery? And they rang up and they said, oh, no, our contacts in America say you can't get that. Then you'd go a bit further and you say, why can't Penguin get a copy of False Mystery? Because the heavies and the government have said, no, we're not printing this book anymore and you're not to sell it.
Look, that's possible. I don't know the details, But of course, censorship is a real thing. I mean, censorship,
yes, absolutely.
We've all seen it in recent years. We've seen incredible censorship of the most basic questions and basic ideas about things, So it's definitely a real thing.
So go on now, just to be ridiculous if we didn't finish this by saying, what is your conclusion about what is the most likely scenario of who was responsible for the death of JFK and RFK, or is that just...
So, look, I'll just delve
into JFK. Still a work in progress.
I don't think we don't have a spare week or 2 up our sleeve to get them across them all. But I would say JFK, what my personal view is, the most likely thing is a coalition of very powerful people, in the military, in the intelligence agencies and elsewhere, who wanted to remove this guy, if you want to go down the rabbit hole. For
what reason did they want to remove him?
I think a spectrum of reasons, And I wanted to pull out this other book.
That he was a Catholic, or he wanted to have the Vietnam, he wanted to end that and in the industrial war complex, have that go to its knees, or he was a Catholic, or was it religion, or was it, what else was it?
I don't think that's relevant myself.
No, you don't.
I think it's more about power and control, really, So I do recommend these 2 books. There is another book here, which I was going to pull out, that is the JFK book that you could not mention for decades.
Really?
This book was completely forbidden to be discussed for about 30 years. Now, all of a sudden, people are talking about this book on the internet.
Final Judgment.
Yes, it's and this book raises something that I mentioned previously, the foreign policy element of this, And this is highly controversial, but I do think I think you should be able to discuss everything, Anything, So this raises the possibility of Mossad being involved in the assassination,
Mossad, Yep.
And it raises it, it says that the motivation for them to be involved was, according to this book, that Kennedy was blocking Israel from getting nuclear weapons,
Yes.
And that Israel felt that it was an existential matter for their nation's survival that they have nuclear weapons, and that Mossad may have played a role in the assassination. My personal view is that, as I said, it would have been a coalition of interests who all wanted him removed. So this book argues that Mossad had a role, They had a role, possibly the most obvious role they had was through Jack Kennedy, Jack Ruby, who removed the alleged lone assassin. I think Oswald wasn't meant to survive the day of the assassination. I think he was meant to be taken out by a sniper or removed in some fashion. But somehow Oswald survived, and then he had to be removed.
David, it seems extraordinary. I haven't spoken to you. I just haven't got time. It seems extraordinary. I haven't spoken to you about what you actually really do, and that's what your body of work in the music industry and everything is.
Well, that's the showbiz, isn't it, Sam?
Well, that's showbiz, but that's just. Do you think Trump will last the distance? Do you think he'll live?
I think it's all about. And power is all about, in these situations, power is all about what enemies you make and what your enemies can do about.
Have you got a list long enough about what enemies you think Trump's making at the minute?
He's got a few.
Yeah, I think my personal view is he probably has enemies and he probably has supporters, you know, so...
Got plenty of them.
Yeah, you know, I mean, well, let's put it this way.
But he's trying to put out of business the people that maybe Jack Kennedy was trying to put out of business. He's trying to put out the social elites who are embedded in the political system in Washington, and their livelihood and their whole lifestyle is never had a job in their life. They've just been career politicians, and he's trying to root them out. The corruption and the pork barrelling and all that. Wouldn't that be motivation enough for the cabal to get
I'm going to go big picture here, Sam. Okay, I'm going to pull right back because I think this is a valuable thing to do. Okay, I'm going to go big picture, right? I'm going to say that, or I'm going to argue that human existence has always been a struggle between good and evil. Okay, so what we're seeing in our political sphere, in our social sphere, and it's what we always see, and sometimes it becomes very obvious. I would argue the last few years this has become very obvious, okay, that we are part of and we are witness to a struggle between good and evil, okay? And that's playing out in front of us, and we have a role in it as well.
And would you say, just finally, would you say the thrust and parry of national politics, the Liberals and the Labor Party is just kid stuff. No, it's just kid stuff.
It's kindergarten.
They don't even know. They haven't even got their eye in yet about trying to wipe people out.
I don't even want to dignify them because they're all puppets. Okay, they're all puppets. You know, they're just doing what they're told to do. Okay, I don't even want to dignify them by giving them names. Okay, Tweedledum, Tweedledee. Why don't we just call them Puppet 337, Puppet 421.
B1 and B2.
Yeah, whatever you want to call them, okay? Really, don't give them the dignity of giving them names. They're just puppets, okay? They're just dancing to the tune of the media and, you know, their controllers and whoever's pulling their strings, you know? Really, can we stop taking them seriously? That's what I would argue.
Now, Dickie, I wonder if we can get someone to round me up here for having this conversation. They rounded me up for Paul Motor, or they rounded me up for speaking to a neo-Nazi. They've rounded up. This is we only just speak to people of interest. That's pretty interesting. That and David Thrussell.
Well, this is supposedly just history, isn't it? But I would argue that it's really relevant history, actually, because as I said, it shows us how power works.
Yep.
You know, in the most sort of concrete kind of way imaginable.
This has been and still is David Thrussell on his theory, not conspiracy theory, his theory as to what's going on with the JFK assassination and RFK's assassination. Thank you so much for coming on You Cannot Be Serious.
My pleasure, Sam. Right. Thank you.